Hey everyone, and welcome back to class. This week we're talking about the mind-body problem, which is a philosophical issue that asks about how the mind relates to the body. And we're going to talk about the two main views that one can have here. There's physicalism and dualism. So there are going to be three videos. The first video is this one, where we're going to talk about what the problem is, what physicalism and dualism are. Then we'll have one video looking at an argument for physicalism, and one video looking at an argument for dualism. So you can watch the other two videos in whichever order you want, but this video is the one you should watch first. So first things first, what is the mind-body problem? Well, the mind-body problem is a philosophical problem. I mean, that shouldn't surprise you. This is a philosophy course. So the problems we're going to deal with are philosophical problems. So the philosophical problem here is explaining how the mind relates to the body, right? So that's super vague, but there are more specific questions we can ask. One is the mind a physical thing? Is the mind separate from the brain, or are they the same thing? Is the mind just the brain? Is there a soul? Do people have some sort of immaterial soul that can, in theory, live after death? Or even if it doesn't live after bodily death, is it at least separate and, in theory, separable from the body? Are there mental states or events or properties that are physical, or are mental states and physical states, or mental events and mental properties fundamentally different from physical events and physical properties? So you have desires, and you have thoughts, and you have memories, and those are all mental in some important way. They are mental states. They are parts of your mind. They are objects of your sort of mental processing. So you think about things, and that means you have mental states. It's a state of your mind. It's a state your mind is in. And there are mental events. If you have a thought or if you make a decision, that's something your mind is doing. That's a mental event. Is that mental event also a physical event? Or is it not physical? Is it fundamentally different from whatever physical events might be happening in your brain? Is you thinking just electrical signals getting sent through your brain? Is it just synapses firing? Or is your mind and your thoughts are they something more, something different, something else, something over and above the physical events happening in your brain? Those are all sort of mind-body problem questions, right? And it seems clear that there are minds and there are bodies. However those things are related, whatever the relationship between a mind and a body might be, it seems clear that you have a mind and you also have a body. You have a physical thing with bones and skin and nails and limbs and whatnot that can move from room to room. That's your body. And you also have a mind. You can think, you can reason, you can wonder about things, you can imagine things. That's your mind. Your mind is the thing that thinks and reasons and imagines things. If you can picture something in your mind, that's your mind at work. So minds are thinking things. Like, just by definition, that's what a mind is. It's whatever's doing the thinking. Minds have thoughts and beliefs and worries and emotions, whereas bodies are physical things with mass and size and shape and location. But these things at least interact. Maybe your mind is part of your body, or your mind is a physical component of your brain or something. But whatever minds and bodies are, they interact. Your beliefs and desires cause your body to move. If you want to leave the house, then your body can physically get up and move out of the house. If you want to have a sip of water, your arm can move, reach out, grab a glass of water, and move it to your face so you can sip. That's your mind and a desire, which is a mental thing, seemingly causing your body to move, causing this physical object to move around and change position and location. That's a mind and a body interacting. So if you're thirsty and you get a drink from a water fountain, well, none of us are at school now, so if you get a drink of water from a glass, it's your desire, or seemingly at least, there might be some pushback later, we'll talk about that, but it looks like your desire for water caused you to walk over to the water fountain and take a sip, or caused you to lift the glass of water and take a sip from the glass. That's your body moving because of a mental state, a desire. So it's a physical event, your body moving around, your physical body parts moving around. That physical event is caused by a mental state, your desire for a sip of water, or the feeling you have of feeling thirsty, the sensation. That's a mental cause of a physical event. But it's hard to explain why and how mental states can interact with physical states unless they themselves are physical states. But they don't seem like physical states. How much does a thought weigh? Like, what is the mass of a desire? Like that, it seems like the answer is, what the hell are you talking about? That's the right answer there, it seems like, maybe. Physical objects have mass and weight and size, but none of that seems to really apply to mental stuff, like mental states, like desires and feelings. Those don't seem physical, or they don't seem like other physical stuff. So we need to figure this out. How does the mind relate to the body? Is the mind a physical thing, or is it not? And if it's not a physical thing, how is it interacting with the body in this way? So the question we really want to ask is the mind a physical thing? Are mental things, are mental states, physical states? And that question has two possible answers, yes and no. It's a yes or no question. And if we answer yes, that gives us physicalism, which in the old days was called materialism, but now the word physicalism is slightly more commonly used. But we're going to use these words interchangeably. Physicalism, materialism, same thing. That's just the yes answer to the question, is the mind physical? Physicalism says there's only one kind of thing in the world, physical things. Minds and thoughts are all physical in some way. Now, there's a lot of nuance, and there are a lot of different versions of physicalism. There's a lot of different ways that you can explain in what way the mind is physical, but we're not really going to worry about all that sort of detail and nuance. We just want to know what the answer to this question is. Is the mind physical? Are mental states physical states? And if we answer yes, the mind is physical, then we get physicalism. If we answer no, then we have dualism. Dualism meaning like dual, two options. Because dualism says there are two kinds of things. There's two kinds of stuff in the world. You got mental stuff and you got physical stuff. And the mental stuff is not physical, and the physical stuff is not mental. So you have mental things like minds and thoughts and desires and feelings, and those are purely mental. They are not physical. They might correlate with some physical stuff happening in your brain, but your mind itself, the mental states themselves, the thoughts themselves are not parts of your brain. They are not just your brain. The mental stuff is separate. It's different. It might correlate, but it's not identical. And physical things are not mental, according to dualism. So whatever's happening in your brain, that's all just physical stuff. Your brain synapses firing are not themselves thoughts or mental states. Whatever state your brain is in, that's different than the mental state your mind is in. They might correlate. It might always correlate, but they are still different things. Your thought and the synapse firings that go along with it are not the same thing. Whereas the physicalist is going to want to say they are the same thing. The physicalist is going to want to say that when you have a thought, That thought just is certain synapses firing at certain rates, certain electrical signals being sent through your brain. That's all thinking is, according to the physicalist. Your mind just is, or your thoughts just are, your brain sending certain signals. That's it. That's all there is to thinking. Whereas the dualist wants to say, look, mental things, mental events, mental states, thoughts, desires, those show up along with brain states. Those show up along with brain physical events like electrical signals getting sent through synapses and neurons. But those synapses and neurons firing, those just go along with the mental stuff. They aren't themselves the mental things. The thoughts are something more, something beyond just synapses firing in your brain. So the physicalist thinks thoughts are nothing but synapses firing in your brain. The dualist thinks that no, thoughts are something more. Thinking is something more than just electrical signals getting sent through your brain. So physicalism says that everything that exists is physical. Or to put it formally but vaguely, as is often done, there is nothing over and above the physical. So how we interpret over and above will change what we mean by physicalism, or what kind of physicalist we are. For our purposes, we're just going to take the word physical to mean fundamentally not mental, just like the kinds of stuff physics studies. But if we say that, if we use the word physical to mean the kinds of things physics studies, that turns out to be kind of tricky to explain what we mean, because we either mean what physics currently studies, which might well turn out to be false, because we already know that relativity and quantum field theory are incompatible. So something that physicists are studying is technically incorrect or incomplete. So the things physics currently studies is at best an incomplete list. We know that. Physicists are aware of that and very open about it. So if we say the only things that exist are the stuff physicists currently study, well, physicists think you're wrong. Physicists think there's stuff that hasn't been discovered yet. Physics isn't finished, basically. So if we say the only thing that exists is what physicists currently talk about, well, that's definitely false. Physicists will tell you that's false. But if we mean, like, by physical, we mean whatever a perfect ideal physics of the future talks about in studies, well, presumably that's going to cover everything that exists, because that's kind of the point. So a perfect ideal physics wouldn't leave anything out. So then that's trivial, because of course the only thing that exists is what a perfect ideal science says exists. That's what perfect and ideal science would do. Tell us what exists and nothing else. So it's not really clear how to understand the word physical here. You might sort of think when you just say, it's the stuff physics studies. But that's not, turns out it's not a very helpful, informative answer. So it's really hard to explain what physical means in this context. And so usually it's just sort of taken as a given that we all have a vague idea of what mental things are and what kind of stuff should count as physical. And that the disagreement is whether or not everything that exists fits into the, we kind of know what should or shouldn't count as physical. An immaterial soul that exists after death and goes to an afterlife, that shouldn't count as a physical thing. If that exists, then physicalism's wrong. But if that doesn't exist, and it turns out there's nothing to thinking except brain synapses firing, all right, physicalism's probably true then. That counts as a physicalist victory. So what we're going to focus on is just sort of a vague sense of what physical means. And what we're going to say ultimately, what we're going to worry about when we talk about physicalism is going to be physical, meaning like the kinds of things that can interact with electrons and protons and neutrinos and whatnot via physical forces, fundamental physical forces. That kind of stuff. If something is subject to gravity, it's physical. If something is subject to the weak nuclear force, it's physical. Like that kind of thing counts as physical. So that's physicalism. It says, however we end up defining physical, everything that exists is physical. That's what physicalism says, including mental stuff. But dualism is different. Dualism says there are two kinds of things, mental things and physical things, and those are not the same. So dualists think that once you've explained all of the physical features of the world, once you've laid out all of the particles, all of the forces, all of the fields, every single physical feature of the world, there's still something left to explain. The mental stuff. Dualists think the mental stuff is fundamentally separate from all the physical stuff. And even once you have a perfect explanation down to the smallest particle of everything that happens in the brain throughout a human life, there's still an open question, which is, how does the mind work? Once you've mapped out the whole brain and everything it does, you still have left to explain how the mind works. You still need to talk about how the brain connects to the mind and how thinking works. That's the dualist view. So Descartes is a dualist. We read an excerpt from the Meditations. And so Descartes is a dualist. And he thinks that the mind or the soul, he thinks mind and soul are the same thing. He thinks the mind is a soul and the soul is an immaterial, live after death, into an afterlife type of thing. So Descartes is a dualist and thinks that the mind or soul controls the body. So the mind or soul interacts with the body. And the question Descartes has to answer, which will be the source of the argument for physicalism in the physicalism video, the question he has to answer is how? How does the mind control the body? If the mind is not a physical thing, then how does that non-physical thing cause physical events, cause your physical body to move around? And that's the question. And that's what we're going to talk about in the physicalism video. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.